start with a poem and then tell you a little bit about Frank's life. The poem's entitled Our Loving Father. God took his friend from the mountain, the majesty of a tree, the warmth of the summer sun, and the calm of the quiet sea. The generous soul of nature is the comforting arm of night, the wisdom of the ages, the power of an angel's flight, the joy of a yearning spirit, and the faith of a budding seed, the patience of eternity, and the depth of family need. And God combined those qualities when there was nothing more to have. He knew his masterpiece was complete, and so he called it God. Frank was born Barabas Sr. in Budapest, Hungary, on March 8, 1939, to his loving parents Joseph Barabas and Rosalia Martha Barabas. He had 3 older brothers, 1 older sister, and 1 younger sister. On January 14, 2022, Frank passed away suddenly with the love of his life, Arlene Barabas, by his side. Frank was my loving father and a devoted husband, and a man you can depend on. He was always there for me when I needed him. He was my mentor, my guide, my rock, and my hero. He taught me valuable lessons to live by. He would always repeat the words, mind over matter, which told me that I am in control of my own situation. Also, he would say, I think if you can think it, then you can achieve it, which taught me to be bold and brave because only I can get my way. Frank was born during World War II in a country in the middle of the war. Not long after his birth, his family's business, along with his entire family and all the factory workers, were put on a train where he lived for the next 5 years. His family of 5, and 1 more soon to be born, lived on a single train car. He would say that his bed was one of the luggage racks. During that time, they dodged bombings and fought off would-be thieves, people trying to steal supplies, and at some point, even the train engine itself. After a while, they made their way from Poland and into Germany, where his family business set up in an abandoned factory in the Black Forest. He told stories of collecting ammunition with his brothers on the forest floor and storing them in one of the train cars when his father found out they were all in a lot of trouble. He said they had enough to blow a hole in the earth. Although he lived on trains during war times and under such trying circumstances, he always had a love for trains. Even traveling on trains, he loved looking at the countryside and preferred the train to any other form of travel. I think it reminded him of home. Eventually, as the war was ending, the Allied forces came in. They offered to relocate my father's family in America. My father's oldest brother, Joseph, was lost during the battle, and they didn't know if he'd survive, so they declined to leave at that time, electing to go back to Hungary in hopes that they would one day show up again. The family was among millions of displaced peoples trying to get back to their homeland. On the way back, it took 2 more years. His family was placed in 3 separate, recently closed concentration camps on the way home. He remembered that the gas chambers were still there, and the sadness he felt at the time for what had taken place. He told us of the trials his family went through growing up. After the war, there was little left to eat in Hungary. Opposing forces had both settled there for a time, and all of the livestock was wiped out. He remembered his family cat would bring rabbits in a couple times a week in the middle of the night. His mother would prepare the meal, always giving a serving to the cat. He said without that meat, they probably would not have survived. He remembered his mother walking 5 miles each way to pick up clothes to sew buttonholes on once a week, and then walking back at the end of the week to drop it off. His father's factory was closed, and he picked up work wherever he could find it. He also remembered some of the good times from his childhood. He would play in the vast cave systems in the mountains near his home, talked about his brothers swimming across the river, and him being only 3 years old, and not knowing how to swim, he stubbornly tried to walk across the bottom. Luckily, his brother jumped in to save him. He talked about seeing pink snow in Hungary when the winds were right. As he was getting older, things in Hungary were going from bad to worse. Lines for food would stretch as far as the eye could see, and there was little offered once you got to the front of the line. My father was in his late teens when tensions began to reach a breaking point. In 1956, my father was 17. He was in a building, and with his girlfriend at the time, when a mortar tore through the building, killing his girlfriend. Not long after that, he watched a sniper kill a little girl that was walking with her father. That was when he decided to join the already growing Hungarian uprising in 1956. He snuck into the building where the sniper was positioned, snuck up behind him armed with only a board that he picked up along the way. He was always very proud of his involvement as a freedom fighter. He knew he had to stand up for the people that couldn't stand up for themselves. He remembered being there when they tore down the statue of Stalin and bringing meat to people in need from a butcher shop that he had worked from the age of 14. He wanted freedom for himself and for his people. When a group of his friends were approached by the troops by the Russians, my father warned against it. He knew it would be a trap. He stayed back with another friend, and they were the only two to survive that meeting. That's when he knew it was time to leave Hungary. He made his escape, hiding in barns, hayfields, and buildings along the way. He said they crossed into Turkey without knowing it and crossed back into Hungary, and that's when he was captured. He was tortured, beaten, and forced to travel with bamboo shoots under his fingernails and toenails. He was transported again by train. This time he was being transported for trial to certain death. When the train stopped and the door opened, him and another guy jumped out of the train and into a river below. They evaded bullets and capture and made their way out of Hungary. That's when my father came to the United States. Once here, he became a very proud American. He respected the freedom more than he respected the freedoms in America more than most would understand. My father came to America and was placed in Roetown, Connecticut, and again, he was a displaced person. The only other Hungarian-speaking people that lived close to him were the Gabor sisters, Zsa, Eva, and Magda. Being the only other people that spoke his language, they were the ones to help him translate the family he was placed with. Only a few short months later, he turned 18, and what he thought were draft papers given to him turned out to be enlistment papers. He joined the United States Army in 1957 and served until 1965, where he rose to the rank of Staff Sergeant. He served proudly in the Army Special Forces 101st Airborne Division and 82nd Airborne. He was a sergeant in the Airborne Divisions, and he was also a jump master. I remember finding one of his awards from the Army for when he had his 500th jump. He said on many occasions that being the jump master, he would be the last one to jump out of the plane and the first one to be on the ground. Often when it was snowing, he told me it reminded him of a bunch of paratroopers coming down under the canopies of their parachutes. He was proud of that time of his life too. He spent 5 years in Alaska as part of the Army, acting as a guide for American soldiers during combat training missions. He would tell the commanding officers where to walk when crossing a frozen river, and when a storm cloud would come in over the mountains, he would give the warning for the changing weather. He guided soldiers in glacier climbing, mountaineering, skiing, and how to read the land and weather patterns. He told me many times of a competition where 3 groups were sent out to the Inuit tribes, and 1 group on snowmobiles, 1 on dog sleds, and his group in cross-country skis. His group was the only one to make it there. While living in Alaska, my father met with a childhood friend, Lily Mako. They married and had their firstborn daughter, Lillian Juliana Barabas. After realizing they were better off as close friends, they split up. Lillian and her mother ended up in California, and my father returned to Connecticut in 1965. That's when he met my mother. He decided it was time to leave the service of the United States Army and begin his service as a devoted husband and a loving father. My mother was still young, and my father was patient. In 1967, my mother was ready to leave her home because of the difficulties she was facing there, and my father was there for her. He told her if she married him, they would never be rich, but her and her children would always have a roof over their head, a warm meal on the table, and they would never go through the trials and tribulations that they endured as children themselves. They were married on March 4th, 1967, and almost 55 years later, Frank never broke his promise to my mother, Carly. He was always there to love and support her in all she did, and she was also there for him. In 57 years together, my mother has a lifetime of memories with my father. They have happy memories, sad memories, lots of funny memories, and many care tales. But what she remembers most in his life is caring, his ability to see her for who she was, and to let her be herself no matter what. She remembers the love in his eyes, the softness of his touch. She remembers the gentleness of his soul and the calmness of his voice. She knew Frank better than anyone on this earth. Her love and support kept Frank healthy for many years. As much as he was her rock, she was his as well. Not Rosemary Barabas Palma, was born on May 21st, 1968. And as not too many young couples do, my parents went on to take on many children along the way. Any child in need was welcome, whether it was through foster care, friends that had nowhere else to turn, or a family member that needed a place to stay. The door was always open. The amount of love, kindness, and caring that was in my parents' hearts was unending, and still is to this day. My parents took in 76 children during their lives on top of the 4 children of their own. When Sue was asked as a child what she wanted to be when she grew up, she would answer, "I want to be a daddy just like my daddy." She remembers growing up, often going to work with my father in his heating and cooling truck. When they would get into his office, he would have her hide in the back of the van under the rags so that she wouldn't be caught. I think all of us could have similar memories. She also remembers going skiing with her father a lot. My father loved to ski. He said later in life that it kept him young. He was even convinced at one point that his hair was getting darker because he started skiing again. One time while skiing, Sue kept falling on an icy spot all day. She didn't feel anything until they were driving home. And when she told her dad she was sore, he said, "Don't tell your mother. She won't let me go skiing anymore." My sister Sherry Desiree Barabas was born on Thanksgiving Day, November 27, 1975. She was the first of the holiday babies. By that time, my father was already working as a heating and cooling technician. Sherry was afflicted with asthma as a child, and on more than one occasion, my father kept Sherry alive while the paramedics were on their way. And on a couple occasions, when the paramedics thought that she was lost and they gave up, my father stayed by her side, continuing to fight until she came through. He saved her life many times over. Sherry remembers a time when my father, my brother Frank, and I climbing Mount Washington together. My father was probably close to 52 at the time, give or take a couple of years. And this was the first real mountain that any of us not kids had ever climbed. And we did little to prepare. Sherry remembers my father using her asthma as an excuse to take multiple breaks on the way up. Every time she spoke, he would say, "You need a break. Okay, let's take a break here." Sherry has such great memories of her dad up in New Hampshire that she ended up moving up in the area when she was a little older. All 4 of her children have a love of skiing, mountain climbing, just like their grandpa. She remembers him going on a 5th grade field trip to New York City, and while on the trip he was rear-ended. The bus was rear-ended. My father slept and snored through the entire thing, never knowing what happened. Being on a bus at 5th grade was probably the closest thing to rest he had those days. She reminds us that my father always had a great talent for sleeping anywhere and everywhere. Just over a year later, my brother Frank Barabas Sr. was born on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1976. Frank started going to work with his father when he was only 4 years old. It was something the 2 of them always enjoyed doing together. My father noticed Frank's understanding of the work he was doing early, and Frank followed in his father's footsteps in the heating and cooling business. My father was so proud to have Frank Jr., and even prouder he decided to follow him in his footsteps in the heating and cooling business. My brother would call him all the time and ask him questions about heating and cooling as my father got older. Most of the time he knew the answer. He just wanted to make sure that he kept my father's mind sharp. The only time I ever saw pain in my father's eyes was when his son Frank was killed by a drunk driver on July 28th, 2019. That was the only time he ever said to me, "This is not okay. I am not okay." If Frank was here today to tell his story, I think he would remember going to work with my father too. We spent a lot of time working together, and with my father growing up, most weekends and even on some school days. We would joke that Frank would use his father's tools all the time, but never put them back. Sometimes you'd find them in the lawn or wherever he used them last. He would also probably remember times when my father took us camping at Rogers Campground, and thanks to my father's commitment and patience, my brother had no fear of taking anything apart. He put things back together again, even if it didn't always go as planned. That was because our Father taught us all that if we can put our mind to it, we can do it. We can achieve anything. Although it may have given our parents a run for our money as children, as an adult, there was nothing Frank was afraid to do. From plumbing to electrical, he would figure it out. But mostly, he would remember the special bond they had. and the companionship and love they shared. I, Richard Salvador Barabas, was born on Halloween, October 31st, 1979. I presented a whole other set of challenges for my parents. At 8 months old, I bit into electrical wire, and I wasn't able to have the reconstructive surgery until I was 4. I can only imagine what my parents went through. With all the trials and tribulations that my parents went through in their lives, I've known nothing but peace, kindness, and love for them throughout my life. My father taught me how to love through his actions, and my mother taught me how to express my love through words. I remember a lot of love growing up from both my parents. My father was kind and gentle. I remember dressing up in his work clothes at a time I could have probably fit in one shoe. I remember walking back to East Haven from work when my father's truck went into the shop. We took multiple bus rides, and I rode on my father's shoulders most of the way. But I think I remember most was his words of wisdom, his sense of humor, his kindness, his compassion for others, and his ability to always do the right thing, not because he was being watched, but because it was the right thing to do. Frank went on to become a contractor, starting his own business in heating and cooling. He preferred servicing homes because that was where he could help people. He was diligent and often worked long hours, responding to service calls in the middle of the night. He loved his craft, and he never complained. Frank wasn't in a service. He served for the freedom of his fellow countrymen as a child in the Hungarian Revolution. He proudly served in the United States Army Special Forces. He served his customers as a contractor, keeping them warm on a cool night and cool on a hot summer day. But most of all, he served his family. There was never a time that he wasn't there for any of us. For 55 years, he was happily served by my mother's side. There was nothing he wanted to do to see her smile or to try to ease her pain. He cherished all of us as much as we cherished him. I'm sure there's a story from each of you here today that you would be able to share, a story of the kindness he had shown you. I wish I could share them all over the world. I also like to think that he serviced the world. My father was the best example of humanity that I've ever known. With all that he went through in life, he never used it as a crutch. Instead, he used it as motivation. He showed the world kindness, compassion, love, respect, and honor. Those are the values he lived by, and those values are something that we can all take from him because he shared them freely with all of us. Rest in peace, Dad. Through us, your legacy will live on forever.
Please stand. Before we go our separate ways, let us include our brother. May our farewell express our affection for him. May it ease our sadness and strengthen our hope. One day we shall joyfully greet him again. The love of Christ, who conquers all things, destroys even death itself. Into your hands, Father, mercifully commend our brother Frank, in the sure and certain hope that together with all who died in Christ, he will rise with him on the last day. Merciful Lord, turn toward us and listen to our prayers. Open the gates of paradise to your servants, and help us to remain to comfort one another with assurances of faith, until we all be in Christ and are with you with our brother forever. We ask this through Christ our Lord. In peace, let us take our brother to his place of rest.
Reach under the flag, take hold of the handles, raise together.